Alexander Knight was a man whose name carried weight in every boardroom from New York to London. He was the kind of billionaire people whispered about rather than approached, a man who had built his empire from nothing and guarded it with a cold, steel exterior. At 42, Alexander was a picture of control, tall, broad-shouldered, impeccably dressed, and intimidatingly handsome, but those who had been close to him before knew he was no longer the same man. He lived in a sprawling estate on the outskirts of the city, surrounded by tall iron gates and acres of manicured lawns. The house itself was magnificent, an architectural masterpiece with glass walls that overlooked endless gardens and a private lake. But for all its beauty, the estate often felt eerily silent, as though something was missing. And something was missing joy. Once, the mansion had been full of laughter. His late wife, Isabella, had brought life to every room she walked into. Her laughter had been contagious, filling the halls like music, and her love had been the glue that held their little family together. That was before the accident. The night everything changed. The memory of that night haunted Alexander still. The car crash had taken Isabella's life and left their son, Liam, in a wheelchair. The doctors had told him Liam was lucky to be alive, but the word lucky felt cruel. Alexander had been there that night, driving the car, and though the accident wasn't legally his fault, the guilt gnawed at him every day. Since then, Alexander had thrown himself into work with vengeance, building his wealth even further, taking over companies, signing deals, and earning the nickname the Ice King in the business world. It was easier to focus on numbers and feelings, easier to attend endless meetings than sit in a quiet room with his son and confront his pain. Liam, now 8 years old, lived in the mansion with him, but might as well have lived on another planet. He had nurses, therapists, and private tutors. Everything money could buy. His every physical need was taken care of, but he rarely smiled anymore. Alexander told himself he was doing what was best for his son, keeping him safe, making sure he had the best doctors, the best equipment, the best education. But deep down, he knew he was failing him in the one way that mattered most, giving him a father's presence. On most days, Alexander would leave for work before Liam was awake and return long after he had gone to bed. He would glance into Liam's room sometimes, watching him sleep with a pang of guilt, but he rarely stayed. There were moments when Liam would try to talk to him, but Alexander, unsure what to say or how to act, would cut the conversation short and retreat to his study or the gym. The household staff, respectful of their employer's distance, never mentioned how lonely the boy seemed. They had seen Alexander lose his temper before, and most of them preferred to stay out of his way. The estate ran like a well-oiled machine, meals prepared on time, rooms kept spotless, schedules followed with precision, but it felt more like a hotel than a home. Even the weather seemed to mirror Alexander's mood. He loved rainy days because the gray skies matched the heaviness he carried inside. When storms rolled in, he would sit by the large window in his study with a glass of whiskey, staring out into the sheets of falling rain, lost in thoughts he couldn't share with anyone. His office inside the mansion was a shrine to his achievements, polished mahogany shelves lined with awards, framed newspaper articles, and photographs of him shaking hands with world leaders and CEOs. But there were only 2 personal photos in the room, one of Isabella smiling in the garden and one of Liam as a toddler, grinning as his mother held him up to the camera. Alexander kept those photos hidden behind his desk, so no one would see them. He had everything money could buy, but inside, he was a man haunted by regret. Every time he looked at Liam, a mix of love and guilt swirled in his chest. He wanted to hold his son, tell him it wasn't his fault, tell him they would find happiness again. But the words always caught in his throat. So he stayed silent. And in that silence, the mansion grew colder. The staff whispered about how the billionaire had changed, how his eyes were harder now, how he rarely smiled. Some said he had become heartless. Others said he was just broken. Whatever the truth, the result was the same. Alexander Knight had built a life where there was no room for vulnerability. But deep inside, under all the layers of pride and pain, was a man who desperately wanted redemption. He didn't know it yet, but everything was about to change. Someone was about to step into this world of glass walls and heavy silences, someone who would shake it to its core. Her name was Sophia, and her arrival would be the first crack in the walls Alexander had built around his heart. The morning Sophia arrived at the night estate, the sun barely peeked over the horizon, casting a soft golden hue over the sprawling mansion. She stood at the towering iron gates for a moment, taking a deep breath to steady herself. The estate was unlike anything she had ever seen. Massive stone walls, perfectly trimmed gardens, and the air filled with the faint scent of fresh rain from a night before. Sophia had grown up in a small town where life was simple, predictable, and often difficult. But this place was a world away, a kingdom of wealth and influence that she had only glimpsed in movies and magazines. Yet, despite the grandeur, her nerves were taut. She had worked hard to get here. Sophia came from humble beginnings. Her parents had struggled to make ends meet, and she had learned from an early age that kindness, integrity, and hard work were her most valuable assets. She had helped care for her younger siblings while her mother cleaned houses, and her father labored long hours at a factory. From them, she had inherited an unshakable resilience and a soft, empathetic heart, traits that had guided her every decision. When she applied for the position of maid at the night estate, she never imagined that the job would involve more than keeping the house immaculate. But something in her heart told her she could make a difference in the lives of those she served, not just perform chores. She had a gentle way of observing people, of noticing the small details others overlooked. A stray tear, a hesitant glance, or a quiet sigh, and she used that insight to care for those around her in ways that went far beyond cleaning and cooking. The massive wooden doors of the mansion opened with a resonant creak, and a stern butler greeted her. His name was Mr. Langley, a man in his 60s with piercing eyes and an air of authority that made newcomers tremble. "You must be Sophia," he said, his voice clipped but not unkind. "The master expects punctuality and discretion. Do not forget that." "Of course, sir," Sophia replied politely, straightening her posture and smoothing the modest dress she wore. She carried herself with quiet confidence, masking the butterflies that churned in her stomach. Mr. Langley scrutinized her for a long moment before nodding, allowing her entry into the estate. Inside, the house was even more magnificent than the exterior suggested. Sunlight filtered through massive floor-to-ceiling windows, glinting off marble floors and crystal chandeliers. The air smelled faintly of lavender polish and fresh flowers, and everything gleamed with meticulous care. Sophia's eyes widened as she took it all in. She had seen wealth before, but this level of perfection was almost intimidating. Mr. Langley led her through the halls, pointing out the staff quarters, the kitchens, and the private rooms designated for Liam. "The master is very particular about schedules," he said. "You are expected to learn quickly. And remember, the child, he is delicate." Sophia nodded, her heart tightening at the mention of Liam. She had read the brief in her interview notes. The young boy was in a wheelchair due to an accident that had left him partially paralyzed. But reading about it was nothing like facing it in person. She had always felt a pull toward children who were hurting, a desire to offer comfort and care when the world seemed unfair. She wasn't afraid of his condition. She was more curious about the person behind the wheelchair, the child who had once been full of life and now seemed trapped in silence. The first time she saw Liam, she froze. He sat by a large window in the playroom, staring outside at the morning sun without expression. His brown eyes were distant, as though he were lost in a world that no one else could reach. His wheelchair was sleek, state-of-the-art, but it seemed to highlight the space between him and everyone else, a barrier that no amount of wealth could overcome. Sophia knelt slightly to meet his gaze. "Good morning, Liam," she said softly, her voice calm but warm. She offered a small smile, hoping it would bridge the distance between them. Liam barely blinked, turning his head slightly to look at her. "Are you going to clean the windows too?" he asked, his tone flat, almost sarcastic. Sophia suppressed a laugh, recognizing that his humor was a shield. "No, I'll leave the windows alone," she replied gently. "I'm here to make things easier for you, if you'll let me." For a long moment, he said nothing. Sophia could feel the silence stretching between them, heavy with unspoken thoughts. Then, slowly, Liam's lips curled into the faintest hint of a smile. It was small, almost imperceptible, but to Sophia, it was a victory. She had broken through the first layer of his wall. Over the next few days, Sophia settled into her role. She learned the rhythms of the mansion, The times meals were served, the schedules for therapy sessions, and the quirks of the household staff. But her attention was always drawn back to Liam. She observed him quietly, noting the subtle ways he reacted to the world around him. He loved the sunlight on his face, the sound of birds outside, and the soft music that drifted from the piano in the drawing room. He disliked being confined too long in one place, and hated meals that were served mechanically without conversation. Sophia began finding small ways to bring joy into his life. She would push his wheelchair to the window so he could watch the morning birds, or read him stories in the afternoons when the house was quiet. She brought crayons and sketchbooks, encouraging him to draw whatever came to mind. And though he often resisted at first, Liam began to look forward to her presence. He would ask questions, share small jokes, and even laugh, a sound that had been absent from the mansion for months. One afternoon, after a particularly gloomy day, Sophia noticed Liam staring out at the rain that streaked the windows. "I wish I could go outside," he whispered. Sophia tilted her head, considering. The idea seemed reckless, but she couldn't ignore the longing in his eyes. "Maybe we could," she said cautiously, "just for a little while. You'd need a raincoat, of course." Liam's eyes lit up, the first spark of excitement she had seen in a long time. "Really?" he asked, voice trembling with hope. "Yes," she said with a smile, "but you have to promise to listen to me." He nodded eagerly. That night, after Liam had gone to bed, Sophia sat quietly in her small staff quarters. She thought about the day, about the mansion, and about the boy who had already begun to touch her heart. She understood that her role was more than cleaning or cooking. She was here to care, to connect, and to bring warmth back into a life that had grown cold. She also understood that she would have to navigate the walls that Alexander had built around both his son and himself. But she felt ready. Sophia's heart was full of a quiet determination. She knew that love and kindness were powerful forces, and even in a house that seemed ruled by wealth and silence, they could make a difference. She would not be intimidated by the grandeur of the Knight estate or the power of its master. Her mission was simple: to bring joy to Liam, and, if possible, to awaken a part of his father that had long been buried under grief and pride. And as she drifted to sleep that night, she felt a sense of purpose she had never known before. She was no longer just Sophia, a girl from a small town. She was a guardian of happiness, a secret bearer of hope, and perhaps... The afternoon sky darkened as thick clouds rolled across the horizon, and soon heavy raindrops began to drum against the massive windows of the Knight estate. The rain fell in a relentless rhythm, turning the garden paths slick and shimmering, reflecting the muted gray of the clouds above. Inside the mansion, the staff moved with practiced efficiency, ensuring that everything remained spotless despite the storm. But in the playroom, Liam sat in his wheelchair, staring at the rain with a mixture of longing and frustration. He had been indoors all day, trapped by a condition and the careful rules his father and the staff imposed. The weather, which most children would have found gloomy, held a promise of freedom for him. It whispered the joy he had once known before the accident. The feeling of raindrops on his skin, the sound of puddles splashing beneath his feet, the smell of wet earth and flowers. He could almost feel it, almost touch it, yet the confines of the room kept him from it. Sophia noticed the way his small hands fidgeted on the wheelchair's arms, the tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes followed the dance of rain outside. "Do you want to go out?" she asked gently, leaning down so that her eyes met his. Liam's eyes widened, a spark of hope igniting in their depths. "Can I?" he asked, his voice trembling with excitement. Sophia hesitated. The storm was fierce, and the garden paths could be slippery, but she could see the yearning in his expression, the way he longed for even a brief taste of freedom. She weighed the risks carefully. "Yes," she said finally, "but we have to be careful. We'll wear raincoats, and I'll stay right with you the whole time. Do you trust me?" "I do," he whispered. Within moments, Sophia had helped Liam into a bright yellow raincoat that enveloped his small frame and shielded him from the chill of the rain. She tugged up her own coat and helped him into his wheelchair, her hand steady and reassuring. The mansion doors opened with a low creak, and the scent of wet grass and earth filled her senses. Liam's eyes sparkled as he took in the garden, the rain glistening on the flowers, the puddles forming along the stone paths. Sophia pushed him slowly along the paths, making sure his wheels didn't slip, and together they moved into the open expanse of the garden. Liam's laughter came first as a small, tentative sound, then grew louder, fuller, echoing off the mansion walls. Sophia's heart swelled at the sound. It was a sound she had longed to hear, one that brought life to a place that had been too quiet for too long. "You remember this, don't you?" she asked softly, nodding toward the puddles that reflected the gray sky. Liam grinned. "Yes, it feels like the old days," he said, his voice tinged with nostalgia. For the next hour, they played together, the rain soaking their clothes, drenching their hair, and washing away the sadness that had clung to mansion's halls for so long. Sophia splashed puddles with her boots, encouraging Liam to do the same. He hesitated at first, then laughed as his wheels rolled through the shallow water, sending droplets flying into the air. Sophia joined him in laughter, her joy contagious. She twirled and danced with him, helping him feel the rain on his face, the wind in his hair. The storm, which had seemed menacing from inside, became a playground, a source of exhilaration and freedom. She encouraged him to reach for the raindrops, to feel them fall on his hands, to smell the wet grass and flowers. For Liam, it was a revelation, a small taste of the normal childhood he had missed for so long. As they moved through the garden, Sophia kept a watchful eye on the paths, making sure Liam's wheelchair stayed safe. She guided him through the puddles, laughed when his wheels slipped slightly, and celebrated his small victories when he maneuvered successfully over uneven stones. She talked to him softly, telling him stories, asking him questions, and listening to his answers. Each word he spoke, each laugh he shared, was a victory over the isolation he had felt for months. Unbeknownst to them, Alexander had returned home early from a last-minute meeting. He had parked his car quietly and stepped into the mansion, expecting the usual silence. But as he passed by the windows of the garden, he froze. His eyes widened at the sight before him. His son, smiling and laughing, rolling through the rain with the maid beside him, completely drenched but radiating happiness. At first, Alexander's instinct was anger. How dare she let his fragile son get soaked in the storm? What if he caught a cold? What if he slipped? What if... His mind raced with all the ways disaster could strike. He clenched his fists, his jaw tightening, and he started toward them. But then he stopped as he watched Sophia kneel beside Liam, holding his hands, spinning him gently in the wheelchair so that he could feel the raindrops splash against his face. Her laughter mixed with his, light and genuine, and for the first time in months, Alexander saw something he had almost forgotten. Pure, unbridled joy. His heart, so long shielded by guilt and pride, softened. The anger faded, replaced by a confusing mix of admiration, longing, and something else he didn't understand. He watched silently, hidden by the shadows of the veranda, unable to move, unable to speak, as the maid he had never paid much attention to before became the conduit through which his son's happiness returned. Back in the garden, Sophia noticed the way Liam's face lit up. "You're doing great," she cheered. "See, the rain isn't so bad, is it?" Liam threw his head back and laughed, the sound ringing through the stormy afternoon. "It's amazing," he shouted, splashing water with his wheels. "I haven't felt like this in forever." Sophia smiled, her eyes misting slightly. She felt a warmth in her chest, a sense of accomplishment and hope that had been missing from her own life. She knew she had done the right thing, that she had given Liam something money, toys, or even therapy could not. A moment of pure, unguarded joy. As the rain continued to pour, Sophia guided Liam back toward the mansion slowly, making sure he was safe and steady. She laughed with him, wiped the water from his face, and let him savor the moment a little longer. When they finally reached the doorway, both of them soaked to bone, they collapsed in a fit of laughter, shivering but happy. "Thank you," Liam whispered suddenly, looking at her with sincere eyes. "I haven't had this much fun in, I don't know, months." Sophia patted his hand gently. "You're welcome, Liam. I'm glad you enjoyed it. Remember, you can always feel the rain, even when it seems scary or different. Sometimes, the best things in life are the ones that surprise us." Just as she said this, Alexander stepped from the shadows, finally revealing himself. His presence startled them both. Sophia's heart skipped a beat, and Liam's smile faltered slightly. Alexander's eyes were fixed on them, unreadable, sharp, and heavy with emotion. Alexander. Sophia started cautiously, sensing his tension. I. But he held up a hand, silencing her. He did not speak immediately. Instead, he watched the two of them in the rain, a complex mixture of emotions playing across his face. He was angry, yes, but beneath the anger was something he hadn't felt in a long time: awe, gratitude, and a flicker of hope. For the first time in years, Alexander realized that his son was truly alive again, that the laughter he had thought was lost forever had returned. And he realized, with a pang of guilt and admiration, that it was Sophia who had brought it back. Alexander stood frozen, a silent observer hidden behind the shadow of the veranda. His eyes, sharp and discerning as ever, had caught sight of a scene that both alarmed and unsettled him. His son, Liam, once confined to a life of strict routines and muted happiness, was outside in the rain, laughing freely, the droplets sparkling against his face like tiny diamonds. Beside him knelt Sophia, the new maid, her hair plastered to her head by the downpour, her eyes bright, her smile radiant as she encouraged Liam to splash and play. At first, Alexander's reaction was instinctive. Anger surged through him like a tidal wave, threatening to drown all other thoughts. How dare she? How dare she put my son in the rain like this? The voice of every protective instinct he had, honed over years of controlling every detail of his business empire, screamed at him to intervene, to scold, to punish. Liam was fragile. He had already endured so much. And here was a maid, someone he barely knew, ignoring rules and boundaries in a reckless display of affection. His fists clenched, the knuckles white, and he stepped forward, intending to confront Sophia immediately. Yet as he took that step, a strange sensation stopped him. Something in the air, in the laughter, in the unguarded joy he saw reflected in Liam's eyes, caused his anger to falter. It wasn't just happiness. It was freedom, something his son hadn't felt in months, maybe years. And Sophia, she wasn't negligent. She was present, alert, guiding Liam with careful hands, her focus entirely on his safety and enjoyment. Alexander's mind whirled, caught between the dual impulses of fear and awe. He remembered the countless afternoons Liam had spent inside, staring at the same walls, his small hands folded in his lap, his eyes dull and lifeless. How many times had Alexander thought he was protecting his son by keeping him confined, by controlling every moment of his day? How many times had he enforced schedules, appointments, therapy sessions, and rules, thinking that discipline equated to care? And yet, here was Sophia, bending no rules except those that had trapped his son's spirit, and bringing him joy in a way that money, schedules, and therapy had never accomplished. Alexander took another step forward, his boots silent against the veranda floor, his heart pounding in his chest. He watched as Sophia guided Liam to a shallow puddle, her hand steadying the wheelchair as he leaned forward, tentatively splashing with his wheels. Liam's laughter erupted, pure and unrestrained, filling the garden and echoing against the mansion walls. Alexander's chest tightened. He had not heard that sound in months, not since before the accident, not in the hushed silence that had fallen over the house. He remembered the night of the accident vividly, replaying it in his mind as if it were a scene from a movie he could not turn off. The screeching tires, the impact, Isabella's last words, Liam's terrified cry. All of it haunted him still. Since that night, he had immersed himself in his empire, in deals and acquisitions, in the accumulation of wealth and power. It had been easier to focus on business than on grief, easier to bury his emotions than to face them. And in doing so, he had neglected the one person who mattered most. Sophia, oblivious to his presence, continued to play with Liam. She knelt beside him, guiding his hands, encouraging him to splash with abandon. Her hair plastered to her face, her raincoat soaked through. She looked every bit a figure of devotion and warmth. Alexander felt a lump in his throat, a mixture of admiration, envy, and guilt. How could he have been so blind? How could he have failed his son so completely? Memories of Isabella filled his mind. Her laughter, her gentle voice, her insistence that joy and love were the most important parts of life. He had forgotten those lessons in the pursuit of control and perfection. And now, Standing in the shadows, he realized that Sophia was teaching him again, not through lectures or words, but through action, through empathy, through love. Alexander's anger returned briefly, but it was now tempered by confusion. He wanted to scold Sophia, to assert authority, to demand she bring Liam inside immediately. Yet he found himself unable to move, unable to break the spell of the moment. Each laugh, each sparkle of water on Liam's face, each careful touch of Sophia's hand, chipped away at the armor around his heart. As he watched, Alexander began to notice the subtle details he had never seen before. The way Sophia adjusted Liam's raincoat with gentle precision, making sure his arms were covered. The way she leaned close to his face, talking to him quietly, encouraging him without pushing too hard. The way she anticipated his needs, sensing when he was tired or cold, and acting before he even asked. Every gesture, every motion, was filled with intention, care, and love. Alexander realized, with a shock that made his chest ache, that Sophia's love for Liam was genuine. It was not a performance for money, nor an attempt to gain favor, nor a fleeting act of pity. It was pure, selfless, and unwavering. And in that realization, a new emotion stirred within him, gratitude. Gratitude that his son had found someone who could reach him where he could not. Someone who could bring back a part of Liam's life that he had mistakenly believed lost forever. He remembered the countless times he had tried to force happiness through expensive toys, elaborate outings, and strict routines, and how those attempts had failed. And now, he understood that joy could not be bought, controlled, or scheduled. It had to be nurtured, felt, and shared. Sophia was nurturing it. She was giving Liam what he had been missing all along, the freedom to feel alive. A strange warmth spread through Alexander's chest, conflicting with the cold rigidity he had maintained for so long. He wanted to step forward, to speak, to express his relief, his admiration, his guilt, but the words caught in his throat. Instead, he remained hidden, a silent witness to the miracle unfolding before him. Time seemed to slow as he continued to observe. Liam's laughter grew louder, mingling with the rhythmic patter of the rain. Sophia guided him gently, teaching him to maneuver through the puddles, encouraging him to stretch his arms and feel the rain on his face. Alexander's heart ached with the realization that he had missed so many moments like this, that he had allowed fear, pride, and grief to dominate his life while his son longed for simple joys. And then, unexpectedly, Liam looked up at Sophia with a smile, so bright it seemed to illuminate the storm around them. "This is amazing," he shouted, his voice full of wonder. "I feel free." Sophia's smile widened, and she leaned closer, her hand resting lightly on his shoulder. "You are free, Liam," she said softly. "You just needed to remember how to feel it." Alexander felt a lump in his throat. He wanted to tell her to stop, to bring Liam inside, to enforce the rules he had always relied upon. Yet he found himself unable to do so. Instead, he felt a growing sense of respect, awe, and even hope. For the first time in months, maybe years, he allowed himself to believe that his son could truly be happy again. As the storm continued to rage around them, Alexander remained hidden, torn between instinct and revelation. He realized that Sophia had not only reached Liam's heart, but had also begun to touch his own. The walls he had built around himself, walls of grief, guilt, and control, were starting to crumble. And he knew, deep down, that this was only the beginning. Eventually, the rain began to ease, the clouds breaking just enough for sunlight to filter through. Liam and Sophia, soaked but exhilarated, began making their way back to the mansion. Alexander watched them, feeling an unfamiliar mix of relief, admiration, and longing. He knew that he would have to confront the reality of what had just occurred. The fact that a maid, someone far below his social station, had reached a part of his son's heart that he could not. But for now, he allowed himself to linger in the moment, savoring the rare and precious joy he had witnessed. And as Liam laughed and Sophia guided him back inside, Alexander felt a subtle shift within himself. Something was changing. He did not yet know the extent of it, nor did he know how it would affect the carefully ordered life he had built. But he knew one thing for certain. His son's happiness had been awakened, and with it, a small spark of hope had been ignited in his own heart. The mansion had returned to its usual rhythm after the storm, but Alexander's mind remained far from routine. His heart still raced from the sight of his son laughing freely in the rain, a sight that both exhilarated and unsettled him. Every instinct he had honed over decades screamed at him to assert control, to demand obedience, to punish those who dare defy his carefully maintained order. Yet, deep down, another voice, quieter, more vulnerable, whispered that perhaps, for once, he had witnessed something beautiful rather than destructive. He stormed through the corridors of the mansion, the polished floors echoing with each heavy step. Sophia, unaware of his presence at first, was assisting Liam in the playroom, wiping water from his face and helping him change into dry clothes. Her hair was damp, her coat still slightly soaked, and her cheeks were flushed with the thrill of the rain-soaked adventure. Liam sat in his wheelchair, giggling, recounting every detail of the storm to her with boundless energy. "Liam, do you remember how you managed to spin your wheels in the puddle?" Sophia asked, her voice warm, playful, and patient. "I know," Liam shouted, bouncing slightly in his chair. "I got water everywhere." Sophia laughed, brushing a strand of wet hair from her face. "And that's the best part. You weren't afraid to try. You weren't afraid to feel." It was in that moment that Alexander entered, his presence so sudden and forceful that both Sophia and Liam froze. His sharp eyes, dark and stormy, swept over the scene. "What is going on here?" he demanded, his voice carrying authority and anger. Every syllable vibrated with the weight of a man who had always been used to absolute control. Sophia instinctively stepped in front of Liam, her hands resting lightly on his wheelchair. "Sir," she began cautiously, You were just what?" Alexander's tone cut through the room like a blade. "Do you have any idea how reckless this was? You let my son, my fragile son, out in the storm, soaking wet, risking illness, slipping, falling, anything could have happened." His hands trembled slightly, betraying the tension he struggled to contain. Liam, sensing Sophia's anxiety, spoke up immediately. "No, Dad, nothing bad happened. It was fun." His voice cracked with a mixture of excitement and defense. "I haven't laughed like that in months. She made me happy." Alexander turned his piercing gaze toward his son, his chest tightening. He had been prepared to scold Sophia, to assert his authority, to restore order. Yet Liam's words pierced through the wall of anger he had built around himself. His son had been happy, truly happy, and for that, he felt a strange mixture of relief, guilt, and curiosity. Sophia took a deep breath, her voice calm but firm. "Mr. Knight, I understand your concern," she said. "I know the risks, and I made sure Liam was safe the entire time. I wouldn't do anything to harm him, but he needed this. He needed to feel alive again. He's been confined, restricted, and sad for too long. Sometimes children, even those who need our protection, need more than safety. They need joy." Alexander felt the words settle heavily in the room. His eyes, so accustomed to commanding obedience, were now fixed on Sophia in disbelief. She was not begging, pleading, or making excuses. She was standing her ground, calmly asserting what she believed to be right. And somehow, he could not find within himself to refute her. Liam, emboldened by Sophia's words, looked directly at his father. "Dad, she's right. I was happy. I haven't felt like this in months. You don't always have to protect me from everything. I just wanted to feel the rain. And she helped me." Alexander's jaw tightened, his fingers curling into fists at his sides. He wanted to argue, to assert control, to demand obedience. But he also saw the truth in Liam's eyes, the unfiltered, unguarded joy that had returned to his son's face. He realized that he had been wrong, that his attempts to protect had, in some ways, suffocated Liam's spirit. For a moment, the room was silent. The only sounds were the occasional drip of water from Sophia's damp hair and the quiet hum of the mansion's heating system. Alexander's mind raced. She could have been reckless. She could have endangered him. And yet he is alive. He is happy. He is free. Finally, he spoke, his voice still firm but with an undercurrent of hesitation. "Sophia, I cannot condone reckless behavior. You disobeyed the rules of this household, and you put my son at risk. That cannot be ignored." Sophia nodded solemnly, acknowledging his authority while maintaining her composure. "I understand, sir. and I accept whatever consequences you deem necessary. But I want you to understand, my intention was never to defy you. I wanted Liam to feel joy again. That is all." Alexander studied her, his mind torn between instinctual discipline and the undeniable truth of her words. She had risked much, her job, her position in the house, perhaps even his wrath, to bring happiness to his son. And in doing so, she had done what he could not. Liam's small hand reached for Sophia's, gripping it tightly. "Please, Dad," he implored. "She's the only one who makes me feel happy. Don't be mad at her. Please." His eyes were wide, shining with sincerity and urgency. "I need her. I love her." Alexander's chest tightened further, the lump in his throat growing unbearably. His son loved this Maid, not for what she could give him materially, but for the way she made him feel alive again. Alexander had spent months, maybe years, trying to shield Liam from harm, from disappointment, from sadness. And yet here was a person, someone of lower status in the household hierarchy, teaching him the most important lesson he had forgotten. Life could be joyful even after tragedy. For the first time, Alexander felt a wave of humility wash over him. He realized how rigid he had been, how narrowly he had defined care and protection. Rules and routines were not enough. Love, attention, and empathy were what Liam truly needed, and Sophia had delivered them with courage, patience, and heart. He exhaled slowly, releasing some of the tension that had gripped his body. "Sophia," he said, his voice quieter now, tinged with awe and something like gratitude, "I cannot deny that you have done something remarkable today. But understand this. I will always expect you to ensure Liam's safety. I cannot and will not compromise on that." Sophia bowed her head slightly, her eyes gentle but firm. "Of course, sir. Safety is always my priority. But so is his happiness." Alexander paused, the words settling into him. He realized that he had been living in fear. Fear of loss, fear of failure, fear of repeating past mistakes. And now, he understood that courage and love often required taking calculated risks. Sophia had done exactly that, and the result was undeniable. Liam's laughter, his joy, his spark of life had returned. For the first time in months, Alexander felt hope. Not a timid hope, but a strong, quiet hope that perhaps, together, they could help Liam reclaim his life, and in the process, heal some of their own wounds. He looked at Liam, who was smiling up at Sophia, and then at Sophia herself, standing resolute yet tender. "Very well," Alexander said finally, his tone softening. "You may continue to care for him as you see fit, within reason. But understand this. Any harm, any recklessness, and you will answer to me directly." Sophia nodded, relief flickering across her face. "Thank you, sir. I promise I will always put Liam first. That is all I want." Liam squealed in delight. "Yay! Thank you, Dad. Thank you." He leaned forward, hugging Sophia as tightly as he could manage in his wheelchair. Sophia hugged him back, feeling the warmth of his tiny frame and the trust he placed in her. Alexander watched, a strange mixture of pride, guilt, and awe washing over him. He realized that he had underestimated the power of care, empathy, and genuine connection. He had built walls around his heart and his household, thinking he was protecting those he loved. And yet, it was Sophia, brave, kind, unwavering Sophia, who had breached those walls not with force or wealth, but with heart. And in that moment, Alexander understood something he had long forgotten. That love, when expressed courageously and selflessly, could heal wounds that money, power, and control never could. The storm had passed, leaving the mansion bathed in a soft, golden light that filtered through the clouds. Outside, the garden glistened with droplets clinging to flowers and shrubs, reflecting the first rays of sun like tiny jewels. Inside, Alexander retreated to his study, closing the heavy wooden door behind him. The house, usually a place of rigid order, now felt strangely alive, as though the laughter from the previous afternoon still lingered in the air. Alexander sank into his leather armchair, his hands gripping the arms tightly. He had confronted Sophia earlier, had spoken firmly, and yet his mind refused to settle. Instead of anger, a strange and unsettling mixture of awe, gratitude, and guilt took hold. He replayed the scene over and over in his mind. Liam's laughter, Sophia's unwavering patience, the way she had guided his son through the rain with skill and care. He realized, with a shock that made his chest ache, that he had been blind. For months, no years, he had been so focused on control, on ensuring safety and order, that he had neglected the one thing that mattered most, his son's happiness. Money, schedules, therapy, and careful planning had filled his days, but none of it had reached Liam's heart. It had taken a maid, someone far below his social and economic station, to accomplish what he could not. Alexander leaned back, staring at the ceiling, feeling a heaviness in his chest. He had always believed that love was expressed through provision, through ensuring comfort and safety. But he now understood that love also required courage, empathy, and the willingness to take risks for another person's joy. Sophia had embodied all of these qualities in her simple, unwavering devotion to Liam. He thought of his own failures, the countless afternoons he had spent in his office, leaving Liam alone with the nurses and tutors, believing that care meant absence. He thought of the moments he had denied Liam's request for freedom or fun, insisting on routines and boundaries that had, in reality, confined the boy's spirit. And he thought of the accident that had changed everything, the night that had left his son in a wheelchair and had left him paralyzed with guilt. Alexander closed his eyes, the weight of regret pressing down on him. How had he failed so utterly, so completely? And yet, as the sunlight warmed his face, he felt a flicker of something new, a quiet hope that it was not too late to make amends. Sophia had shown the way. She had reminded him that happiness could be nurtured, and that love could heal wounds left by tragedy. He rose from his chair and began pacing the study, his mind a whirlwind of thoughts. He needed to act. He needed to change, not just for Liam, but for himself. For too long, he had hidden behind his wealth, his control, and his pride. But the laughter of his son, ringing pure and free in the rain, had cracked open the walls around his heart. Alexander considered Sophia's role in the household. She had been bold, compassionate, and selfless, qualities he admired deeply. Yet he had nearly dismissed them, nearly punished her for doing what was right. He realized that he could not allow fear, pride, or rigid rules to dictate his relationships any longer. He needed to trust, to step back, and to allow genuine connection to flourish. By the time he sat back down, Alexander had made a decision. He would apologize to Sophia, not just for his anger, but for his blindness. He would acknowledge her courage and devotion, and he would make it clear that her presence in Liam's life was valued and respected. But more importantly, he would begin to take an active role in his son's life, reconnecting not just as a provider, but as a father. Later that morning, he sought Sophia in the staff quarters. She was folding freshly laundered clothes, her movements precise and methodical, her mind seemingly elsewhere. When she looked up and saw him, she straightened immediately, sensing his presence and the gravity of the moment. "Sir," she said cautiously, bowing her head slightly. Alexander approached her, stopping a few feet away. He studied her carefully, the dampness still in her hair from the rain, the faint smile on her lips as she glanced at him, the warmth in her eyes that had captivated Liam. He took a deep breath, steadying himself. "Sophia," he began, his voice softer than it had ever been in the household. "I owe you an apology. Earlier, I reacted out of fear and anger. I failed to see what you were doing for Liam. I failed to see the happiness you were bringing him." Sophia's expression softened, though she remained composed. "Thank you, sir," she replied quietly. "I only want what's best for him." "No," Alexander said firmly, shaking his head. "I have been wrong. For too long, I have measured care and control in schedules and rules. And in doing so, I have neglected the most important thing, his heart. You reminded me today that love is not about control, but about presence, empathy, and courage. I want to thank you for that." Sophia blinked, clearly moved by his words. "Sir, You don't need to thank me," Alexander interrupted gently. "I need to thank you. You have given my son something I could not. And for that, I am grateful beyond words." There was a pause, heavy with unspoken emotions. Sophia nodded, her eyes glistening, and offered a small smile. "I'll continue to care for him, sir." I promise to always put his happiness and safety first. Alexander exhaled, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders. I want you to continue, he said, and I want to be a part of it, too. I realize now that I've been absent in ways that matter most. From now on, I will try to be the father he deserves, not just a provider he needs. Sophia's eyes widened slightly, a mixture of surprise and hope shining through. That means a lot, sir. More than I can express. Alexander nodded, feeling the first stirrings of real change within him. He knew the road ahead would not be easy. He had spent years in isolation, building walls around his heart and his household. But Sophia had broken through those walls, showing him the way not through force, but through love. And now, he was ready to step into the light she had offered. Later that afternoon, he found Liam in the playroom, quietly drawing in his sketchbook. The boy looked up, his face lighting up as his father approached. "Dad!" Liam exclaimed, pushing himself slightly forward in his wheelchair. "Did you see the rain this morning? I was thinking about yesterday. It was amazing." Alexander smiled, a genuine, unguarded smile that had been absent for months. "I saw," he said softly, kneeling beside him. "I saw everything, and I'm glad you were happy. Really happy." Liam's eyes widened, his grin growing. "I want to go out again, Dad. But this time with you, too." Alexander felt a lump in his throat, a mixture of emotion he could barely name. "Yes," he said finally, his voice breaking slightly. "We'll go together, and we'll make it safe. But most importantly, we'll make it fun." The boy cheered, and Sophia, standing nearby, smiled quietly. She had planted the seed, shown the way, and now it was up to Alexander to nurture it. And for the first time, he felt a sense of purpose beyond wealth, beyond control, beyond pride. He felt hope, a fragile but growing hope, that he could be the father Liam deserved and perhaps even heal the parts of himself that had been locked away in grief and guilt. As the sun streamed through the windows, glinting off the polished floors, Alexander realized that life had given him a second chance. And with Sophia's courage and Liam's joy, he was ready to embrace it, fully, without fear, and with an open heart. The days following the storm carried a new energy to the night estate. The mansion, once silent and heavy with strict routines, now seemed lighter, almost alive, as if the laughter and joy from the rain-soaked afternoon had lingered in its walls. Alexander, who had long been consumed by work, guilt, and control, began to notice the subtle changes not just in the house, but in himself. He found himself seeking out Liam more often. At first, it was cautious, a few moments in the playroom, watching silently as the boy painted or read. But gradually, he allowed himself to engage, asking questions, listening to Liam's stories, and even attempting to participate in play. The initial awkwardness between father and son slowly melted away as Liam responded to his father's effort with excitement and openness. Sophia watched these interactions with quiet satisfaction. She had always known that Alexander had a deeply protective heart, though it had long been buried beneath layers of pride and grief. Her role was now as a guide, not just for Liam, but for Alexander as well. Help him understand that connection, empathy, and joy were just as important as protection and provision. One afternoon, Sophia arranged a small activity in the garden. The sun was shining brightly, and the paths were dry, a perfect setting for Liam to practice maneuvering his wheelchair outdoors with more confidence. Alexander joined them, standing a little distant away, observing but also ready to step in if needed. "Ready, Liam?" Sophia asked, her voice cheerful. Liam nodded eagerly, gripping the wheels of his chair. "Let's do it." With Sophia guiding him and Alexander following, Liam rolled along the garden paths. His movements were tentative at first, but encouragement from both adults bolstered his confidence. Alexander found himself offering advice, suggesting small adjustments, praising Liam's successes, and celebrating his progress. Each smile, each laugh, each word of appreciation from Liam chipped away at Alexander's old habits of distance and control. As they moved to the garden, Alexander noticed the small ways Sophia interacted with both of them. She allowed Liam space to make choices, offered gentle guidance, and encouraged independence without ever compromising safety. Her presence reminded Alexander that true care was not about strict rules, but but about supporting growth, confidence, and happiness. At one point, Liam stopped by a cluster of flowers, pointing excitedly at the bright blooms. "Dad, look! Aren't these amazing?" Alexander leaned closer, studying the petals. "Yes," he said softly, surprising himself with the sincerity of his voice. "They're beautiful, just like you noticed them." Liam beamed, and Sophia smiled knowingly. Moments like these were exactly what she had hoped for, the father beginning to notice, to participate, and to cherish the simple joys with his son. Over the next several days, this pattern continued. Alexander gradually increased the time he spent with Liam, from short periods of observation to active participation in play, therapy, and simple outings around the estate. They rolled through gardens, explored the mansion's vast corridors, and even ventured a nearby lake under Sophia's watchful eye. Each shared experience strengthened their bond, and Alexander began to rediscover a part of himself that had been dormant for far too long. Sophia's influence was evident in every interaction. She encouraged Alexander to listen, to observe, and to respond with empathy rather than authority. She reminded him that Liam's abilities were not limitations, but opportunities for growth and discovery, and she modeled the patience and compassion that had allowed Liam to flourish after the accident. One evening, after a long day of activities, Alexander found himself sitting beside Liam on the veranda. The boy's wheelchair was angled to catch the fading sunlight, and he held a sketchbook filled with colorful drawings of the garden, the rain, and the adventures they had shared. "Dad," Liam said softly, holding up a drawing of the three of them. Sophia, Liam, and Alexander, laughing in the rain. "Look, you're in it too." Alexander's chest tightened as he studied the drawing. It was crude, childlike, yet perfect in its depiction of joy, connection, and love. He realized that Liam saw him not as a distant figure of authority, but as someone who could share in happiness, someone capable of care, and someone who could be trusted. "I see it," Alexander said, his voice gentle, "and it's wonderful. Thank you for sharing this with me, Liam." Liam's smile broadened, and he leaned back in his chair, satisfied with the approval. Alexander felt a warmth spread through him, a combination of pride, love, and relief. For the first time, he felt that he was truly present in his son's life, not as a distant provider, but as a father. Sophia, standing nearby with a towel in hand, watched the moment unfold quietly. She had played a crucial role in facilitating this bond, but she understood that it was now Alexander's responsibility to nurture it further. She smiled softly, feeling the satisfaction of seeing both father and son begin to heal together. As the weeks passed, Alexander became more comfortable with the unpredictability of Liam's needs and desires. He learned to read his son's moods, to anticipate his frustrations, and to celebrate his triumphs, no matter how small. Sophia remained a steady presence, offering guidance when needed and allowing Alexander to grow into his role as a caring, attentive father. One afternoon, Sophia suggested a small picnic in the garden. Alexander, initially hesitant, agreed to join. Liam was ecstatic, rolling his wheelchair along the paths with boundless enthusiasm. Alexander followed closely, carrying a basket of snacks and drinks, while Sophia ensured everything was set up safely and comfortably. As they settled on a blanket, Alexander found himself laughing freely, a sound that had been absent for years. He watched Liam eat with delight, pointing out insects and birds, and sharing stories of the day's adventures. Sophia sat nearby, occasionally guiding Liam's hands or offering gentle encouragement, but mostly letting the father and son enjoy the moment together. Alexander realized that these simple activities, picnics, walks, shared laughter, were far more valuable than any lesson, therapy, or schedule he had imposed. He saw the genuine happiness in Liam's eyes and felt the quiet pride of being present in his life. That evening, as they returned to the mansion, Alexander paused by the garden gate, watching the sun dip below the horizon. He felt a sense of peace he had not known in years. He had witnessed the power of empathy, courage, and genuine connection. He had seen how Sophia's influence could nurture joy, resilience, and love, and he had begun to understand that his role as a father was not about control, but about presence, support, and trust. As Liam rolled ahead, chattering excitedly about tomorrow's adventures, Alexander turned to Sophia. "Thank you," he said quietly, his voice sincere, for everything, for helping me see, for helping me be a better father." Sophia smiled, her eyes reflecting warmth and quiet pride. "It's my honor, sir. You've done the hard work. You've opened your heart. That's what matters most." Alexander nodded, feeling the truth of her words. He knew the journey was far from over. There would be challenges, frustrations, and moments of doubt. But with Sophia's guidance and Liam's trust, he was ready to embrace the role of father fully, to nurture a bond that could heal past wounds and create lasting joy. And in that moment, as the mansion settled into evening quiet, a new bond had truly formed. A bond of trust, love, and hope, uniting father and son in ways that wealth, power, and control had never been able to achieve. The rain returned one late afternoon. Soft at first, a gentle patter against the grand windows of the night estate. Unlike the previous storm, this rain felt different, calmer, almost soothing, as if nature itself recognized the transformation taking place within the mansion's walls. Liam, sitting in his wheelchair by the window, watched the droplets dance across the garden, his small hands tapping in rhythm with the falling water. Sophia entered the room quietly, carrying a tray with a warm drink and a small snack. Her hair was damp from the light rain outside, and a faint smile curved her lips as she approached Liam. "Would you like to go out and feel the rain, Liam?" she asked softly, setting the tray down on a nearby table. Liam's eyes sparkled with excitement. "Yes, please," he exclaimed. "But can Dad come too?" Sophia glanced toward the study, where Alexander had been working. He looked up at that moment, his eyes catching the light from the rain-soaked window. For a brief instant, he hesitated. There was a fear deep within him. The fear that his attempts to connect with Liam might fail, that the past mistakes and rigid walls would prevent a true bond. But then he saw the anticipation on his son's face and the gentle encouragement in Sophia's eyes, and he knew there was only one choice. "Yes," Alexander said quietly, standing. "I'll join you both." The three of them stepped into the garden together. The rain fell softly, cool and refreshing, soaking their clothes, yet bringing an unexpected warmth from the shared anticipation. Liam giggled as he wheeled along the wet paths, Sophia guiding him gently while Alexander followed closely, his eyes attentive, careful, and yet filled with wonder. For Alexander, this was more than a simple walk in the rain. It was a revelation, a mirror reflecting all that he had missed in the past months and years. Watching Liam's joy, the freedom in his movements, the sparkle in his laughter, Alexander realized that he had been imprisoned by his own fears and pride. Sophia had shown him that true care required courage, empathy, and the willingness to embrace life fully, rain or shine. "Dad, look!" Liam shouted, pointing at a puddle where raindrops collided, sending tiny ripples across the surface. "It's like a little ocean." Alexander knelt beside him, smiling despite the dampness clinging to his coat. "Yes, it is," he said softly. "And you're the captain, steering through it with courage." Sophia watched quietly, noting the subtle changes in Alexander's demeanor. He was no longer the distant, guarded man she had first encountered. There was warmth in his gaze, a softness in his voice, and a willingness to participate rather than merely observe. He laughed at Liam's antics, offered encouragement, and even let the boys splash in puddles with unrestrained delight. At one point, Liam's wheelchair slipped slightly on a slick patch of grass. Sophia's hand shot out instinctively to steady him. But before she could reach him, Alexander moved with surprising swiftness, catching the chair and stabilizing it. "You're okay," he said firmly but gently. "See? We're learning together." Liam's face lit up with relief and pride. "Thanks, Dad," he exclaimed, hugging Alexander's arm briefly. Sophia smiled, her heart swelling with satisfaction. She had facilitated this connection, guiding Alexander gently toward the father he had once been and still could be. But now, the bond was no longer fragile or tentative. It was growing, strengthened by shared experience, laughter, and trust. As they continued through the garden, Alexander felt a shift within himself. The rigid control he had always clung to, the fear of failure, the need to maintain distance, all of it began to melt in the face of genuine connection. He realized that Sophia had not only nurtured Liam's joy, but had also opened a door for him to rediscover his own heart, long buried under grief and pride. They reached a small fountain in the center of the garden, its water reflecting the rain and the dimming sunlight. Liam leaned forward, trying to touch the rippling surface. Alexander knelt beside him, gently holding his hand steady. "Do you feel that, Liam?" he asked. "It's the water, but it's also freedom. You're discovering it, and I'm discovering it with you." Liam nodded vigorously. "I feel it. It's amazing." Sophia crouched beside them, placing a reassuring hand on Liam's shoulder. "See, Alexander? This is what happens when we embrace life fully, even in small moments like these. Joy, freedom, love, they're always here, waiting for us to notice." Alexander looked at her, and for the first time, he spoke words he had never admitted aloud. You've changed our lives, Sophia. Not just Liam's, but mine as well. I don't know how to thank you." Sophia shook her head gently. "No thanks are necessary, sir. You've taken the first steps yourself. You've opened your heart to him, and that's what matters most. My role was only to guide, to show, to support." Alexander felt a lump in his throat. He had spent so long believing that love was measured in protection, control, and wealth. But here in the rain, watching his son laugh and play, he understood that love was measured in presence, empathy, and courage. And Sophia had taught him that in ways he would never forget. The rain began to lighten, turning into a soft drizzle, and Alexander suggested they return to the mansion. But as they made their way back, he noticed Liam slowing down, a contemplative look on his face. "Dad," Liam said softly, "do you think? I can always feel this happy, even when it rains or when things are hard." Alexander knelt beside him, brushing wet hair from his son's forehead. "Yes, Liam," he said gently, "you can. Happiness isn't just in sunny days or easy moments. It's in us, in how we choose to see, feel, and connect. And you reminded me of that. We'll find it together, no matter the weather." Liam's eyes brightened, and he reached for Sophia's hand. "And you'll help us, right?" he asked. Sophia nodded warmly. "Always, Liam. Always." Alexander watched the exchange, a profound sense of gratitude swelling within him. He realized that the three of them, himself, Liam, and Sophia, were forming a bond stronger than he'd ever imagined possible. It was built not on wealth, authority, or distance, but on trust, love, and shared experience. And in that bond, he found healing, purpose, and hope. As they entered the mansion, Alexander felt a subtle shift in himself. The fear that had governed his life, the guilt that had paralyzed his emotions, the pride that had kept him distant, all of it had begun to fade. He knew that challenges would come, that fears and doubts would resurface. But he also knew that with Sophia by their side, and with his son's trust and love, he could face anything. That night, as Alexander reflected on the day, he understood something fundamental. Sophia had done more than care for Liam. She had awakened something in him. A father who could love without fear, a man who could embrace vulnerability, and a person who could cherish the simple joys of life. The rain had revealed more than the garden. It had revealed the heart of the Knight family, and the path forward was now clear. The three of them, bound by trust, love, and courage, were no longer separate entities navigating their own struggles. They were a unit, learning from one another, healing together, and discovering the true meaning of family. And as Alexander watched Liam fall asleep that night, peacefully resting in the knowledge that he was loved, he silently vowed to protect, nurture, and cherish this bond for the rest of his life. The rain outside had stopped, leaving a fresh scent of earth and renewal in its wake. And inside the mansion, a transformation had occurred, one that wealth, power, and rigid control could never achieve. The Knight family had been reborn, and their hearts were finally free. The morning sun broke through the clouds, casting golden beams of light across the Knight estate. The storm had passed, leaving behind a fresh scent of wet grass and blooming flowers. For the first time in years, the mansion felt alive, not just filled with activity, but with warmth, laughter, and hope. Alexander stood on the balcony of his room, his gaze sweeping across the garden that had become the stage for so many recent revelations. It had been only a few days since that rainy afternoon with Sophia and Liam, yet something inside him had shifted permanently. He no longer looked at the estate as a fortress or a monument to his success. Instead, he saw it as a sanctuary, a place meant for living, for sharing, for loving. He had decided that today would be different. Today would not be about business, meetings, or deals. Today would be about Liam, about showing his son that life could be celebrated, that even the simplest moments could be turned into beautiful memories. Sophia was in the kitchen early, preparing a light breakfast. She was humming softly, an old tune her mother used to sing to her as a child. When Alexander entered, she turned quickly, startled. "Good morning," she said politely, brushing her hands on her apron. "Good morning, Sophia," Alexander replied, his voice gentler than usual. "I was thinking we should do something special today." "For Liam?" Sophia tilted her head, curious. "Special? What do you have in mind?" Alexander hesitated, then smiled. "A celebration. Not a grand, formal party, but a day just for him. For us. Something to remind him that life is still full of joy and adventure, even if things are sometimes hard." Sophia's face softened. "That sounds wonderful, sir. What kind of celebration?" "A picnic," Alexander said after a moment's thought. "Out in the garden. Balloons, his favorite food, maybe even music. Something simple but unforgettable." Sophia's eyes lit up. She could already picture Liam's delight. "I'll take care of the arrangements," she said, her voice brimming with excitement. "He'll love it." By mid-morning, the estate staff had helped transform a corner of the garden into a whimsical paradise. A checkered picnic blanket lay spread beneath the shade of a large oak tree, its branches swaying gently in the warm breeze. There were colorful balloons tied to benches, a basket filled with Liam's favorite treats, strawberries, sandwiches cut into fun shapes, lemonade, and even a small chocolate cake. When Liam was wheeled outside and saw the sight, his jaw dropped. What is all this?" he asked, wide-eyed. Alexander knelt beside him, smiling. "This, my son, is a celebration. For you, for everything you've been through, for how strong and brave you've been, and for how much you've reminded me of what's important." Liam's eyes filled with tears, but they were happy ones. "For me," he whispered. "For you," Alexander said firmly. "Today we celebrate you." The boy grinned, and Sophia gently wheeled him closer to the picnic area. As they settled down, music began to play softly from a portable speaker. Cheerful, lively tunes that floated through the air like laughter. Liam clapped his hands in delight, and for a moment the world seemed to hold its breath, watching the small family rediscover joy together. They played games, one Sophia had taught Liam during quiet afternoons, and Alexander joined in, surprising even himself with how much he enjoyed it. He helped Liam throw a ball, cheered when he succeeded, and didn't mind getting grass stains on his expensive shirt when he knelt to participate. At one point, Sophia brought out a small kite. "I thought we could try this," she said shyly. Liam's face lit up. "A kite? Can we, Dad?" Alexander looked at the clear sky and smiled. "Absolutely. Let's make it fly." Together, they launched the kite, Sophia running gently to get it airborne, Alexander holding Liam steady so he could feel the string tug in his hands. The kite soared higher and higher until it danced against a brilliant blue backdrop, and Liam laughed so hard that Alexander thought his heart might burst. "This is the best day ever," Liam shouted, his voice carrying across the garden. Alexander glanced at Sophia, and their eyes met for a brief moment. There was a silent acknowledgement between them, a shared understanding that this moment was more than just a simple picnic. It was a turning point, a memory that would live in all their hearts forever. After hours of playing and laughing, they sat down to eat. Sophia cut slices of cake, handing one to Liam first. "Make a wish," she said softly. Liam closed his eyes, gripping the fork tightly. After a moment, he blew out the single candle they had placed on top of the cake. "What did you wish for?" Alexander asked. Liam grinned mischievously. "If I tell you, it won't come true." Alexander chuckled, ruffling his son's hair. "Fair enough." But in that moment, he made a silent wish of his own, that this bond, this happiness, this newfound sense of family would never fade. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting golden hues across the garden, Alexander felt an overwhelming sense of peace. He had not checked his phone all day. He had not thought about business or wealth or responsibilities. He had simply been a father, present, engaged, and full of love. Sophia began packing up the picnic, but Alexander stopped her. "Leave it for now," he said quietly. "Let's just sit here a while longer." They sat together beneath the oak tree, Liam leaning contentedly against his father, Sophia sitting nearby. The air was filled with the chirping of crickets and the rustle of leaves, and for once there was no tension, no rushing, no worry, only the quiet comfort of belonging. In that stillness, Alexander turned to Sophia. "You've given us this," he said softly. "Not just today, but everything, the laughter, the connection, the hope. I don't think we could have gotten here without you." Sophia's eyes glistened, but she shook her head modestly. "I only helped you see what was already there, Mr. Knight. You and Liam just needed a little reminder." Alexander smiled, his heart full. "Then consider us reminded. And don't call me Mr. Knight anymore. Call me Alexander." Sophia hesitated for a moment, then nodded with a small smile. "Alexander it is." As twilight deepened, they finally made their way back to the house. Liam was sleepy but glowing with happiness. "Can we do this again?" he asked drowsily as Alexander carried him inside. "Yes," Alexander said, his voice resolute. "We'll celebrate life like this as often as we can." And as he tucked his son into bed that night, Alexander knew that this was only the beginning. There would be more challenges, more storms, more moments of doubt. But there would also be more kites, more laughter, and more picnics. The Knight family had rediscovered joy, and Alexander intended to keep it alive. The following morning dawned quiet, with a stillness that felt almost sacred. The picnic from the previous day had left everyone with a lingering sense of happiness. But for Alexander, it had also left something else: clarity. For years, he had been a man consumed by business, driven by profit margins, and obsessed with building an empire so vast that no one could ever question his worth. But as he stood in his son's room, watching Liam sleep peacefully, Alexander realized that none of that mattered if he failed as a father. He walked over to Liam's wheelchair, running his fingers along its armrest. This chair had once been a symbol of everything Alexander had lost, of the accident that had changed Liam's life forever, of the guilt he carried for not being there that day, of the anger that had fueled his relentless ambition. But now, it felt like something else entirely, a reminder of resilience, of survival, of love that endured despite pain. When Liam stirred awake and saw his father standing there, he smiled sleepily. "Morning, Dad." Alexander knelt by the bed. "Good morning, champ. How are you feeling?" "Happy," Liam said simply. "Yesterday was the best day of my life." Alexander's throat tightened. "Then we'll make today even better." He kissed his son's forehead before leaving the room, but instead of heading to his office as usual, he went straight to the kitchen where Sophia was tidying up. "Good morning, Sophia," he greeted, his tone warm. "Good morning, Alexander," she replied, still a little shy whenever she used his first name. "I've been thinking," he said, taking a deep breath. "You've been more than just a housekeeper to this family. You've been Liam's friend, his teacher, his protector. And truthfully, you've been my anchor too. I want to make that official." Sophia blinked, surprised. "Official?" Alexander nodded. "I want you to stay here, not as staff, but as part of this family." Her eyes widened. I don't know what to say." "Say yes," Alexander said with a small smile. "Stay. Help me raise my son. Help me make this house a home." Sophia hesitated only for a moment before nodding, tears welling in her eyes. "Yes, I'd be honored." But Alexander wasn't done. There was more he needed to do, more he needed to set right. Liam reached for Sophia's hand and squeezed it. "Good. I always wanted Mom." The words caught Sophia off guard. She looked at Alexander, her heart pounding. Alexander knelt by his son, smiling through the emotion threatening to overwhelm him. "Then I guess we're lucky, because now we have one." The atmosphere in the room shifted. It was no longer just an agreement or a legal arrangement. It was a birth of something new, a family forged not by blood alone, but by choice, trust, and love. That evening, Alexander asked Sophia to join him for a walk in the garden. The night air was cool, and the stars shimmered overhead like diamonds scattered across black velvet. "I want to ask you something," Alexander said after a long silence. Sophia looked at him curiously. "What is it?" He stopped walking and turned to face her. "Stay. Not just as Liam's guardian. Not just as part of this family. Stay as my partner. My equal. I don't want to face another day without knowing you're here with us. With me." Sophia's breath caught. She had seen hints of this growing bond between them, but hearing the words out loud made her heart race. "Alexander," she began, but he gently took her hand. "I know I've made mistakes," he said, his voice low and sincere. "I've spent too many years hiding behind my work, shutting people out. But you've reminded me what it means to live, to feel, to love. So I'm asking you, Sophia, will you stay?" Her answer was quiet, but resolute. "Yes, I will." Alexander exhaled a breath he didn't know he'd been holding and, for the first time in years, truly smiled. Not the polite smile of a businessman, but the genuine, unguarded smile of a man who had finally found peace. When they returned to the house, Liam was still awake, waiting eagerly to hear what had happened. "Well," he asked, his eyes bright. Alexander lifted him gently from the wheelchair and held him close. "We're a family now, son. All three of us." Liam's face broke into the widest grin Alexander had ever seen. Best day ever. And as laughter filled the mansion that night, Alexander realized that the journey was complete. The walls he had built around himself had crumbled, replaced by warmth and love. The estate, once cold and distant, now echoed with life. For the first time in a very long time, the Knight family, all three of them, were